Hello and welcome to the D
and A of Home Interiors, the podcast which is all about empowering you to make confident interior and furnishing decisions for your home. I'm Audrey, founder of Audrey Wheel Interior Design.
And I'm Deirdre, founder of youfurnish.com, such 100 plus furniture retailers on one website. The DNA of Home Interiors is proudly sponsored by checkatrade.com. If you need help with your next home improvement project, you can search from over 39,000 recommended, vetted and monitored trades on checkatrade.com.
So today in the podcast, Deirdre and I are delighted to be talking with Vicki Tynan, who is the blogger behind Wheel Chic Home. So Vicki blogs all about fabulous, accessible interiors. And this comes very much from the heart for her because she's married to a man with multiple sclerosis. So we're going to hear more about Vicki's background, how she came to find her passion in interiors, and all about the problems and solutions that she's constantly coming up with to improve her life at home with her husband. So welcome to the podcast, Vicki.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for asking. It's really nice to be asked.
Really exciting to have you here. It's actually a subject that we just have not touched on yet on the podcast. Something I am very passionate about, I must say. I'm not in your situation where I'm living sort of with the topic, if you like, but it is something I've come across numerous times over the years of working with clients. And the bit I do feel really strongly about actually is the kind of stigma that we often see kind of associated with this kind of topic. So like just to kind of get us started and get a little bit more background to the subject, can you tell us sort of about yourself, about your husband, and maybe a little bit about the home that you live in?
Sure. So I met my husband about 15 years ago now, and I remember very vividly on our third date. It was a wet, rainy day in Brighton, and we'd gone to a coffee shop, and he fell up the stairs and tripped up the stairs, and hot chocolate cascaded down the stairs. We just put it down to it being a wet day, didn't really pay much attention to it, and just sort of carried on. A few dates later, he had another fall. Again, it was wet. We didn't really pay too much attention to it. He had badly broken his leg a few years before, and we figured maybe there was a little bit of imbalance there due to him breaking his leg. So we didn't really pay too much mind to it. Fast forward a couple of years later, we got married, and a couple of months after that, I had been prompting him for a little while to go and see the doctor about restless legs. His legs were just kicking around in the night, and it was stopping me from sleeping, and I like my sleep. And so he went and got some tests, and about 2 months after we were married, he got a diagnosis of primary progressive multiple sclerosis, which is the sort of the rarest form, I suppose, of multiple sclerosis. About 10 to 15% of people have that type of multiple sclerosis. And essentially it means you start and you just get worse. And there's very little in the way of medication or things like that can help this particular type. There's not a lot of money that goes into it from a trial perspective. So about 2 months after we were married, he got that diagnosis. I had a little debate with my mother-in-law about whether I can give him back and get a refund. We had a little bit of to and fro in. But the consultant at the time said to us that 90% of people with that type of multiple sclerosis will be in a wheelchair within 10 years. And it was at that point that I started to think about our house and what are we going to do? We had just bought a new house that was Victorian, semi-detached, lots of steps everywhere, in and out of the bathroom and all that, and a very steep staircase, etc. And instantly I was like, oh no, the house isn't suitable, and what are we going to do? So that kind of got me going on that journey, if you like. So we moved out of the inappropriate Victorian home and looked for a bungalow, which is really challenging. to find the right sort of property. We viewed 55 properties before settling on this one. Many have steps to get into, many have steps to get to the kitchen, many have steps to get into the dining room. In some cases, the doors were never wide enough. The hallway wasn't wide enough to even get to the bedroom in one of them. So we found the house search particularly a real challenge. And again, that started the juices flowing with, what can I do here? And I was also adamant that I didn't want my house to look like a hospital, that we knew at some point we might need a grab rail or we might need to do this, but I did not want to live in a care home or in a hospital type environment with the kind of, very industrial hospital chic is what I like to call it. We didn't want to go down hospital
They're
chic.
not exactly glamorous, are they, Vicki?
No, they're really, really not. And they have to be practical, and I understand all of that. But for a home, they're not homely. So I wanted to start writing a blog to sort of share some of the ideas that I had and some of the tricks that we were trying out and some of the things that we were doing to find alternative ways to the hospital chic. And that's where the blog came from. So I've been doing the blog for about 5 years. And I talk about the challenges within my own home, but I also do home tours of other people's homes that have disabilities. And we talk about the different adaptations and changes that they've made. So hopefully it gives people a little bit of inspiration that you don't have to live in a hospital.
So how long ago is that, Vicki, that you got married?
12 years ago. Yeah.
12 years ago.
And we stayed in the Victorian house for about another 4 years after that. But after a number of falls down the stairs and mobility being less and less, we ended up having to look for something a little different. So now we're in a bungalow, and they're so hard to come by. But I'm really pleased we found this one. It's a nice home.
So you mentioned 55 viewings, which is
Yes.
obviously a phenomenal amount.
Yes.
How long did that process take from when you sort of decided to move up until when you found the house and moved into it?
About 18 months, maybe closer to 20
Wow.
months, something like that. And some of them, were perhaps me being a little fussy with, I'm not really sure I like this design or something like that. Many bungalows are vacated by elderly people, so you have to take into account there will be wood chip wallpaper on the walls, there will be paisley carpet, there will be all those things, but all of that is, I can see past that, and I've always been able to see past that. They're just extremely hard to come by, extremely expensive, and there's inevitably a lot of work that comes with them. But once you've got them, they're really lovely homes. Underrated.
Well, I guess, as well, like you almost had that added pressure, I assume, where you felt like this is somewhere you need to be a really long time. If it's that hard to find, it's not that you're going to sort of say, well, we'll sell on in a few years and
Yes.
And find somewhere else. And I mean, house buying, even without those extra considerations, is pretty tough going, like to kind of, find there's always certain compromises, isn't there? So
Yes,
I can
yeah.
well imagine, how much of a challenge that must have been.
And there's so few accessible homes, and many people buy bungalows and convert the upstairs. And we saw a lot of lovely bungalows with lovely master suites upstairs, but my husband didn't want the guests to have the best bedroom when he couldn't get up the stairs. Which is completely fair, I think. So but we found a lovely home, and we're happy here, so that's good.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, because I mean, one thing I always sort of think about in relation to this whole subject is just how, it's quite a long time ago now since, like, say, initially in 2005, the Disability Discrimination Act came in, and then that was followed by the Equality Act in 2010. And around those times, I was working in commercial interiors. So, like, the amount of consideration that we give to, saying I was doing a lot of retail design at the time. So, everything had to, if it was raised, it'll have to have ramps, and you have to think about everything from a wheelchair perspective, and the big radiuses for turning round, if there's toilets, the accessibility. And then to just think, I mean, obviously new builds do have to have consideration, but there's so many existing homes that just aren't suitable to live in, but people don't necessarily, when they're upgrading those homes, think in that way. So a lot of money might be put into homes, so people aren't really kind of future proofing them, either for themselves if they're to stay, or for the next people who might want to move in. But through your blogging, and when you talked about sort of wanting to help other people on a similar kind of journey with sort of the not the hospital looking interiors, but really making somewhere a home, no matter what kind of extra accessible needs they have. Do you feel like that is changing at all? Is there kind of more consideration now being given to that, or what, have you seen anything change over the years?
I mean, there are rules in place. Of course, there are laws in place for new buildings, but I'll give you a really good example. A friend of mine lives in a new build. It's about 4 or 5 years old. And there are 6 houses in this small close. And they've all got sign off by building regulations, because they've got the wide doors, which are about 90 centimetres or 3 feet wide doors. They've all got wheelchair thresholds at the front door. But 3 of those 6 were up a set of steps to get into the front door.
Wow.
So they've got sign off because they built the front door with a wheelchair threshold, but a wheelchair user can't get there because there are 3 steps. Yeah. Similarly, with my friend's home, luckily was on the side where there were no steps, so we can go and visit and no problem. But we can't get into the garden without lifting, because the rear of the home isn't wheelchair friendly, but the front is. So even though there are these considerations, certainly in England and Wales, that for wheelchair friendly doors and things like that, actually that the builders are doing the bare minimum.
Wow.
And there are steps to get into a wheelchair threshold, which is crazy.
Yeah.
This was something I wanted to ask when I was thinking of our upcoming conversation. So I live in an apartment, Vicki, and there's steps. There's 5 steps to get up on the front. Now you can go through the car park, which has a ramp. Now the ramp is quite steep, so actually practically, I think I'd struggle to push up.
Yes.
A wheelchair, or sometimes I sort of think of the equivalent of like a buggy, for example, even. And then there's a really heavy gate. So you do your swab, and then you need to pull the heavy gate towards you or push it. Now, I can barely do it standing alone without having a pram or shopping or anything like that. Now, if I was in a wheelchair, you're already back from it to begin with. You have to be reversing your wheelchair, pulling a very heavy gate. So it is something where you can tick a box and say, yes, this is wheelchair friendly, but actually, is the gradient of the ramp so much that actually it's not practical? So how much do you find that things are ticking boxes rather than actually properly practical?
It's quite often, and you see it in public spaces as well. So even though the Equality Act of 2010 says buildings need to be accessible, they only have to make reasonable provision. And it really depends on the business that occupies that space, what reasonable provision is.
I was going to say, how do you define reasonable?
Exactly. And actually there are loopholes in the law as well, which we discovered when we went to a restaurant some years ago. It had been converted from, it was a chain restaurant going into an old curry house that was there. So we knew the building and we knew that it was level access in, and we went, oh great, we're going to go and try this out when it opens. And my husband wanted to use the bathroom, and there was no disabled bathroom at all, even though it had been completely refurbished. And after some Twitter ranting on my behalf, I ended up speaking to one of the regional managers of this chain restaurant, who said they have understood there to be a loophole whereby if you refurbish the interior of a property, and again, I'm talking about England and Wales here, but if you're refurbing the interior of a property, but you're not changing the layout, you're not bringing down walls, you don't have to put a disabled toilet in if there wasn't one there before. Wow. And I just find that astonishing. So here we were in a chain restaurant that has 75 restaurants around the country. And when I spoke to the regional manager, he said, in my area, which is the southeast of England, you can only visit these 2 because the other 8 don't have toilets. It's astonishing. But there's a loophole, and they got sign off for that because they weren't knocking a wall down.
Yeah.
So in the end, he couldn't use the toilet in that particular place. So whilst we have got these provisions with the Equalities Act, the Discrimination Act, we've got all of these things, and we've got more awareness now, it is still nowhere near where it should be. And everywhere we go, we have to say, can I get in? Is there a ramp? In some restaurants, we've been taken through the back, in through the car park, round the bins, in past the kitchen, just to get to our seat. And I know that not every building can be accessible. I live in a town in West Sussex where we've got a strip of medieval buildings at the end of the high street, and some of those have been converted into shops. Now, I don't expect him to be able to get into a medieval building, but even newer buildings in the high street will look at you like, with puzzled eyes if you ask, where's the ramp? How do I get in? We haven't got anything. So it's improving, but it's nowhere near as good as it should be. And there's a lot more of awareness about it now, which is good. And there's a really great app called Sociability app that is coming up now, and people are working on it, and kind of wheelchair users and those with visual issues are visiting lots of towns, lots of cities across England at the moment, but going to be spreading out into the future with an app so you can check the accessibility of a venue before you go there, because the worst thing is you get there and then you can't get in, or you can't go to the toilet, so you're constantly having to think ahead. So there's more awareness now, but it's still not great. It's perhaps better than it was, but it's still a challenge. Everywhere you have to go, you have to pre-think, can I get in? Can I do this? Same with visiting someone's house. Can I get in? If not, who can help me get in? So
it must be super frustrating, actually. And I suppose, like a lot of these things that, there's new acts being put in place for equality on various things. It's a journey rather than these things happening overnight. Now, I'm keen, Vicki, to really get into all of your planning around the home. What did you have to think about? So you've mentioned the door width, you've mentioned, a sufficient space to be able to turn around. You also talked about maybe they've been owned bungalows by older people who had carpets. Is carpets a no-no because it's tougher to, push the wheelchair along, and to do that? Like, I'm sure there must be considerations around flooring, but maybe you could go into some of the other things apart from the size and sort of space consideration of doors and the rooms, but into all the other things that you must have had to think about.
Do you know, what's interesting is that it impacts everything. My husband's disability and his needs, and I understand it's different for everybody, it impacts everything that we buy. So the sofa, it can't be too low. The sofa that I long dreamed of for years is no good because it's quite a low, squishy, deep one. And we needed to find something that was fairly firm but still comfortable, because he doesn't have a lot of upper body strength, so we'd just sink into it and then never get out again. We needed something with an arm that was of a decent height so that he could lean on that to get up and move around and adjust position and things like that. Leather sofas are a no-no. He just slides straight off a leather sofa. So leather is no good. So it has to be fabric, and it has to be a particular height and cushion firmness and also depth. Otherwise, he'd just be lying back on it rather than sitting in the sofa. Dining tables, desks. My husband isn't particularly tall, and he has a small wheelchair. So at the moment, the height of tables and desks isn't a problem to him. But if you're somebody who is a wheelchair user and you're quite tall and your feet are on the footplate, your knees are going to hit a standard size height table or a desk. So you have to look at the design of the desk. Has it got low pieces, kind of low side areas at the side? Are the legs far enough apart that you can get under? There's a lot of tables around at the moment with kind of end pieces that you can't wheel a chair under, like the legs kind of, you can't get under the end of the table. A round table, invariably a wheelchair user can't get too close to it because of the pedestal in the middle of the round table. The foot plate will always hit it. So it impacts everything that we buy. The height of the bed, the firmness of the bed. If the bed is too soft, he would slide off of it in the night. If it's too high, particularly when we visit a hotel, even in an accessible room in a hotel, if you've got a bed that's really high, the ones you have to take a running jump to kind of get into, I have to physically lift him and pick him up and put him onto the bed because it's not the right height. So we had to find a bed that was comparable in height to his wheelchair seat, and the same with the sofa. You mentioned flooring. Funnily enough, we had the floors ripped up 2 weeks ago. The carpets finally went because he was starting to find it a challenge to transfer from hard flooring in the hallway to carpet in the kitchen or carpet in the bedroom. Not the kitchen, the living room and the bedroom. And we now got luxury, what is called LVT, luxury vinyl tile, all over the house with no thresholds. And rather than him taking 20 seconds to get into the front room, he just glides in now, which is lovely. And it's made such a difference. Kitchen cabinets, the upper cabinets he can't reach anymore. So everything, all of our plates, etc., are down below. We've just bought an American style fridge freezer with the fridge and freezer section side by side because he could only reach one shelf of the old fridge. And even though he's got one of those grab things that you can kind of grab and extend and try and reach something, it would inevitably land on his head, and it was starting to get a little dangerous. So we've now got an American fridge freezer, so he can now at least open everything and reach whatever he needs to gain that level of independence. But it does impact everything that we buy. We changed the tap on the sink in the kitchen because the lever was high up, and now the new lever is down at the base because he couldn't reach the old one, and now he can reach this one. And so everything that we buy has to be considered in terms of how he will use it and what his needs are. But there are some really wonderful things that we haven't yet got in our home that we would like. You can get pull down rails for wardrobes so that you can bring the clothes down to you and then push them back up again. We don't have those yet. But maybe we'll get to that at another point. But at the moment, I do all the hanging up. So,
but I think I've seen some of those pull-down rails on Selling Sunset. I don't know if it's a program that you've seen. It's the high-end real estate in LA, but it's in those big, fancy walk-in wardrobes, and the clothes just come down to you. So, you'll have to get a very nice dressing room, I think, Vicki, there with...
I'd need to move house rails for that, definitely, to have that size of wardrobe. Oh, I dream of that. The lottery numbers haven't come up, so maybe one day.
Yet. Quick shout out for our sponsor, checkatrade.com. Search recommended tradespeople online with checkatrade.com.
But you mentioned a really important word there, Vicki, like independence. And I think this is what sometimes people don't really think about, that, it's not good enough to have somebody else help. There's so many things that if you can actually allow that person to have the independence to be able to get the things out of the fridge themselves or hang up their own clothes. I mean, that's so important for mental well-being, isn't it? Just to be able to do things yourself. And I think a lot of people probably don't quite appreciate that, maybe, unless they've sort of been in that situation or have somebody close to them and who they can see are facing the challenges. But like with the furniture that you mentioned, would you always then spend some time going to, say, furniture showrooms with your husband, and he could actually try out getting out of the wheelchair onto the sofa or onto the bed and sort of test it out?
Yeah, it's the only thing we can do. I mean, on a recent trip to IKEA, we were testing out dining tables, and half of them he couldn't get under because of the design of them. And he would just knock into them. So, and I did a little video on it for my Instagram some time ago, and I think it's interesting because that isn't a thing that you would automatically think of as a challenge. But there are some companies that I found when we were looking for a dining table recently that will custom build, one with extra long legs for you. Just all you need is maybe a couple of inches height. There are desks, of course, that you can buy where you can raise the height of them, either with an electric button or with a wheel or something. You can raise the height of a desk. But it's sometimes that the high street stuff doesn't always work. So sometimes we're going to have to go with custom build. We haven't had to do that yet, but there may come a time if he needs to change his wheelchair to something bigger, then we'll have to get a dining table with longer legs, for sure. But we're not there just yet, but maybe.
Yeah, well, hopefully as time goes on, there might be more options. But yeah, obviously so much high street furniture is built around making it as economical as possible. And of course, there's certain ergonomic factors, but not, covering, everybody's needs, unfortunately. And that's, I can definitely see that's a challenge.
Yeah, and then you end up having to go down the custom route, which of course then costs money. You can't just rock up to, your high street store and walk away with a dining table if your wheelchair is the sort that can't go under it. But I've seen lots of inventiveness on my Instagram feed with people who have built their own tables themselves out of scaffolding planks, gone for a real kind of industrial vibe, and they've made one end higher than the other end, so that the wheelchair can get under, and then everyone else sits at a regular height, or they can fold it away if the wheelchair user is not at the table. I've just seen so much inventiveness from people because needs must, because the high street isn't able to supply it at the moment.
Yeah, and obviously, if you're handy in that way or into DIY, it's brilliant to be able to sort of customize elements and kind of, and then also tailor it to the space you have available as well. So, because that's the challenge everyone has.
People are getting a bit more of a realization of that, I even think, with working from home, Vicki. So I don't know if you've seen some of the images of, ironing boards acting as standing tables for people while they're working. So they probably have a little bit more of an appreciation for adapting your home in a different way now. But for most people, it's something that they might not really consider because they've never had to think about it. So if you're one of those listeners, Vicki, can you share with us, if you have a visitor who's coming into your home, what could we do to be helpful or to be more considerate? Like, what maybe are your key gripes or things that will actually help? Because I suppose there's an element, going back to Audrey's point, in independence, that's like fussing over somebody, fussing and trying to, but actually, how can we be the most helpful without being intrusive?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that you should always do is ask the disabled person what they need and what help they would like. And that's true whether you see someone in the street that you think might need help, ask them what they want. If they don't need the help, move on. But if someone's coming to your home, find out what help they're going to need. It may be as simple as you building a small wooden ramp so that they can get into your house. We've just come back from an Airbnb, and that's a whole nother subject about accessibility. But we've come back from an Airbnb where the owner built a ramp for my husband so that he could get onto the terrace. And he just did it out of a piece of plywood. It was just so simple. And he said, let me do this for you, and that was really lovely. So it might be as simple as just getting a piece of wood and to help access in. It may be that you can get some, the suction vacuum grab rails. You can buy them very cheaply online for £10-20. They stick to tile and come off without any damage, just to put in a bathroom or maybe by the front door if someone's walking with crutches or a stick or something like that, or needs help just getting in over the threshold, then just having one of those that you can stick somewhere that can come off again if you don't want to have it around the house, and you can just pop it in a drawer until the person visits next. It's really making sure, particularly for wheelchair users, that you've moved the rugs out of the way, or that you've moved the coffee table out of the way, or do you want to move from your wheelchair to the sofa, or would you rather stay where you are? What can I do for you? How can I help? So but it's really just kind of observing how they might move around your house, if they can move around your house, and see what they might need. When we visit family members that have older houses, we inevitably have 2 or 3 people just lifting the wheelchair in with my husband through the door. And whilst that's not independence, he understands that's necessary because these homes aren't accessible. So he doesn't mind too much with that, because it's family and friends, and they're doing their best for you. So it's really just understanding what the person wants. Always ask them first. But I think there are little kind of adaptations and things that you can do that are temporary. If someone's staying in your home for a night or two, you can get a cheap bath board that goes across the bath, for example, or a cheap shower chair to help them in the shower. And those things, can be got easily secondhand, or again, £10-20 online that are very, very easy to have in the house and put away when you don't need them. So most people won't think about accessibility, and why should they? Why would they if they've never experienced it? My family now have experienced it for the last few years, so are very conscious of, we need to make sure that we move that out of the way, for example. But if you've never experienced it, why would you think about it? But even if you've broken the leg and you're on crutches for 6 weeks, or you're in a wheelchair for 6 weeks because you've broken your leg, you might then suddenly go, oh, hold on a minute, I can't do that I used to be able to do. But again, awareness is growing, as with all of the things we're seeing, and the movements and things like all of the kind of causes that are going around the last couple of years. I think this is one of the things that's starting to grow traction, and I hope it continues. But yeah, ask the person. That's my primary message, really.
So we can see a very nice background. We're recording over Google Hangouts, but you can see inside Vicki's home by checking out the Instagram page, Wheel Chic Home. And I suppose I'm keen to understand, Vicki, how does the interiors go? Do we still have a say, or who's making all of the decisions?
He kind of goes along with what I suggest. I guess even my husband in a wheelchair doesn't necessarily think about what might work for him, but I'm constantly kind of trying to look at it from a design perspective, if you like, and then from an aesthetics perspective, and then from a practicality perspective. So even in the room that I'm sitting in, these shelves behind me are pushed all the way over there, rather than in the middle of the room, or the middle of the wall, I should say, because if he wants to use this desk, he can come in and there's space for the wheelchair to turn. And that was the reason. If these shelves were any closer to this desk, he wouldn't be able to sit at this desk. So it's always constantly going through my mind. And it's for 2 reasons, obviously to make him safe and comfortable, but also to make my life easier, and to have a home that I enjoy as well. We do try to make the decisions jointly. The floor decision was joint. Okay, he maybe liked the colour a little bit better than I did. I'll admit that. He got that one.
You had to give him some kind of input.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do think, what's great about what you're doing is that, you're showing like a real passion for interiors and some really great style ideas that, anybody could be inspired by. But then obviously, the backdrop to it all is, the real functionality behind your decision making out of that necessity. And I think, when I said in the beginning about, sometimes I just feel, there is that stigma where people think, oh, you mentioned grab rails, and automatically, your mind goes to the hospital chic rather than the PVC. Like trying to integrate these necessities in with, a stylish environment is really great. But then also I think, that's the kind of messaging then that can make it easier for people everywhere to kind of pick up on the fact that so many people do live with these extra constraints, and isn't it much more inspiring, I suppose, if you can actually merge all that together.
And if you look carefully, you can find a grab rail that is invisible. So one of the grab rails in our bathroom is completely invisible. People wouldn't know it's there because it's integrated into the toilet roll holder.
Wow. Okay. And where do you buy such a product?
I just found it online. I just kind of Googled and found it's not the cheapest toilet roll holder you'll ever come across. As with all these things, there's always an extra cost, but it's invisible. It just looks like a toilet roll holder, but it can hold weight. So it doubles up as a grab rail. Well, it is a grab rail. You can get towel rails that double up as grab rails as well. Your shower riser, you can buy a shower riser that is a grab rail, but it still functions as a shower riser. So if you don't want to have a grab rail, you can have something that looks, great, but it actually is a grab rail in disguise. And so you just need to do the research around that. And you can buy silver grab rails, you can buy gold, you can, brass, you can buy black ones, you can spray paint them. Go and get a wooden one and paint them to match your wall if you don't need to worry about it from a visual perspective. If you do have visual issues, paint it a completely contrasting color, give it a little bit of zing. You can really mix it up. People with dementia, people with cognitive issues, people with visual issues would prefer to have something that is a real deep contrast to what's on the walls. So therefore, why not go crazy? Why not paint it navy blue? Why not do that? Have some fun with it as well. So there's plenty of things out there, but you have to look for them. And sadly, they are more pricey than the white UPVC stuff that you get. But you can be creative as well, paint them.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. And I think you've mentioned a lot of specific things like that on your website and your Instagram feed, haven't you? Things that you've come across, which is no doubt really helpful for somebody kind of starting out on that journey. Because I think, when you've probably got some great Google kind of keywords that you type in now, but whereas when you just type in, grab rail, obviously, you do tend to get like loads and loads of just the most common sort of things crop up, don't you? And you probably have to dig a bit deeper then to find the really good stuff. So
I would recommend using different words, use inclusive, use adapted, use universal. In America, they still use the word handicapped. So for right or wrong, if you're searching for something that may come from America, maybe that word is better to use when you're searching for something rather than adapted or inclusive or, so just mix up your searches a bit, type in brass, type in, or there are some really wonderful businesses out there that are doing fantastic accessible bathrooms that I look at every day on Instagram, and you can go get a grab rail from those guys, like a black one or a pink one or whatever you want, so it doesn't have to be white. It can be white might fit in with your design.
Yes.
And that's fine too.
Yeah. White is what we tend to see most often, but good to know there's lots of options. And Vicki, you've just touched on something there that I wanted to ask you about. So, all the names. So we see accessible interiors or accessible design mentioned, also inclusive, adapted interiors, universal design. And so you've just told me something I wasn't aware of, that they still use the word handicapped in America. But say these four main words, accessible, inclusive, adapted and universal, I mean, would you say, are they all the same thing, or do you obviously have your hashtag inclusive design, so you kind of maybe veer towards that? Or
I mean, I think they operate slightly differently. I would say things like inclusive and universal are sort of, what design should be striving towards, which is to make it universal and inclusive for everybody. I think the word accessible does have connotations of disability that goes with it. But, I use them kind of interchangeably, really. I would say that a building has to be accessible. I use accessible hashtags in my Instagram posts and things. Adapted, I don't particularly use. Again, in America, they may use that a little bit more often, perhaps. But I would say universal and inclusive, because really that's what we should have. We should have a design that when we walk into a restaurant or when we walk into a home, that anybody can use it, whether it's an elderly relative, whether it's a wheelchair user, whether it's a toddler. It should be used and usable by everybody. in some fashion or other. And I think, and it should be, and if it's clever enough design, it should be almost invisible. You don't notice it. It's just there. And that's really what I would love to strive for. I suppose I tend to use the word inclusive more because an Instagram friend of mine, Vela Morrison, who is the Inclusive Home, she is an architect and a champion of sort of accessible and inclusive homes. And she and I have an Instagram account together called Inclusive Chic. And we put themes up there and ask people to sort of share posts on that theme. So we've got a little community of people over there on Inclusive Chic, whereby people sharing whatever they find, even from, accessible play areas and parks for children to, restaurants, to homes, to bathrooms, to bedrooms. And so we try and get a little bit of that in. So inclusive is probably the one I use the most. Mm-hmm. But I don't think there's a wrong one necessarily.
Okay, so that's another great Instagram account to follow then, Inclusive Chic, for lots more insights and tips.
Yes, yeah, we started that a couple of years ago, and we're growing slowly. We've got over, I think, 1,500 people now. It's a nice little community, and there's lots of people interested in inclusive design in every way, from outside the home to inside the home. So it's a nice place, and some really great ideas, really wonderful homes, really interesting ideas and creativity. Which is really fun. So yeah, a nice one to follow.
So Vicki, this has been absolutely fascinating, and I loved some of the insights around even the depth of the sofa. It's things that you just don't think about. So it's been fascinating to learn some of those considerations. Can you leave us maybe with one last thought about if there's one change that you think the government or people could do, what would that be?
It's mandating accessibility more fiercely out and about, and in building new homes. I think it's something, a really, really small percentage. I should have researched it, but I think it's something like 10% of new homes are accessible, even less than that. And so we're left in kind of real limbo with an inability to find suitable homes and visit restaurants and visit hotels and visit theatres. So whilst we have the Equalities Act 2010, I think some further steps could be taken to have to try and mandate some of that, so that even going to the theatre isn't a challenge and a headache, and comprises 2 or 3 or 4 phone calls to make sure that the place is actually accessible before you go. So I just think, but new homes, so many new homes are going up in the country at the moment, and hardly any, if at all, of them are accessible, which is a real shame. Particularly with a generation that is getting, older population. It's not just around disability; it's around elderly people as well, needing that sort of support and help in the home, and I find that a real shame. So I would love to see more accessible homes built, and I would love to see more focus on accessibility from the government in terms of public spaces. But things are improving. It's not all doom and gloom, but things could be so much better as well.
Indeed. It's a journey, and it's one of those ones that's hard to speed up, unfortunately.
Things move slowly, but forward. That's okay. Yes, exactly.
Well, Vicki, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been absolutely insightful and so educational to learn, and to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, I think is an apt description of our conversation today. So thank you for your time and for sharing those insights into, your personal journey with your husband, Michael.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's a real pleasure to be asked to speak about it, and I hope it just gets people thinking in a slightly different way, even about future-proofing their own homes, because you never know what's around the corner. And really pleased to be here. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Vicki. If you enjoyed our podcast, we would be delighted if you could rate, review and subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. This will help others who are seeking home and furnishing advice and inspiration discover the DNA of home interiors. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and Twitter at the DNA of Home Interiors.
If you are looking for inspiration and help in designing your home interiors, take a look at Audrey Whelan's masterclasses on audreywhelan.com/events. And don't forget to check out youfurnish.com, a search and comparison website which helps connect people with amazing furniture from over 100 retailers. We designed it to solve the problem we and thousands like us faced furnishing our homes. And now we are really excited that everyone can search, discover, compare and shop for their home all in one place.
Thank you to our sponsor checkatrade.com for their support in bringing this episode to you. And most importantly, thank you all for listening today.
We hope you can join us next time.